All right, so this is the last session of the People of the Passion study that we're doing. And we have the most controversial character that we've been looking at for the last time. We're going to finish with a bang, okay? And Judas Iscariot, the man who betrayed Jesus. So what I did is I went back on my journalism background and took 3 of the 5 questions that you're supposed to ask when you're a journalist. You know, the 4 W's and the H, right? Who, what, when, where, and how. So I took 2 of them and added why. And the reason why I picked these 3 questions is kind of to structure what we're going to talk about tonight. So first of all, talking about who Judas Iscariot was. There's a number of Judases that you come across in the Bible. For one of them has a book of the Bible named after him. You know which book? Jude, right. It's a very short book towards the end of the Bible. And that was believed to be among the 12, there was even 2 Judases. Again, I'm going to use a rhyme that I've used before. Maybe you guys can remember this rhyme, to remember the disciples, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, men he most depended upon, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew next, and Thomas too, James the less, and Judas the greater, Simon the zealot, and Judas the traitor. See? So there's 2 Judases. And it's believed that the other Judas was the one who authored Jude. Right. So what we're going to talk about is Judas the traitor, or Judas Iscariot. And so there's, as your book noticed, there's a little bit of discussion among the scholars about what Iscariot means. And I'm just going to go ahead and refer to the book on this part. I'll have to look it up here. I think it's on page 60, 61. The name Judas is common enough. Several other Judases are mentioned in the New Testament, but the surname Iscariot is a mystery. 2 main theories exist, neither without problems. One, first advanced by the ancient Christian commentator Jerome, thinks it's a transliteration of the Hebrew Ishkaroth, or man of Kerioth, a collection of small towns in Judea. And the other suggestion is that it's a corruption of the Greek Sicarios, which was a term for a kind of Jewish assassin. It literally means man who stabs. Now, both of these have their own problems, but if you were asked my opinion, I would say I would probably go with the first one. That Iscariot probably refers to his lineage, because that's the way most people that you come across in the Bible come across in the Bible, usually their names are from their father. And very often their father's name come from where they came from. And Judas's father was a man named Simon Kerioth, or Iscariot. So that seems to be more logical. I think the argument that it's a corruption, meaning assassin, the particular direct meaning of the assassin in that isn't quite. I mean, Judas didn't stab Jesus, so it doesn't quite fit. So that's probably who he was. Why this is important is because it identifies Judas as separate from the other disciples. All the other disciples, as the book notes, are Galileans. They are from Galilee. That's where Jesus, but Judas comes from a different area. If we were to believe that theory, which I do, he comes from Carios. So he's already distinct from the other disciples, which kind of fits in with his role in the disciples. So he is called by Jesus, and there is no specific calling story in Jesus like there is for Peter and James and John, or Levi, also called Matthew, or Thomas, also called Nathaniel. Not Thomas, Bartholomew, also called Nathaniel. For some of the other disciples, there's a calling story. There is no calling story for Judas. He just appears as one of the 12 that were called. So the question arises then is, what role did he play? Well, the scriptures say that he was the treasurer of their group. And John said he was a thief. The Gospel of John says he was a thief. That he skimmed the pot. He kept track of the pot that they all lived by, and he had a tendency to take some every once in a while. So he was a kind of a petty thief or a criminal. So that was his role. It is also believed in some different portrayals of Judas in drama or in the music, specifically the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, or some other depictions, suggests that he was perhaps, although he was not identified as such, perhaps a member of the Zealot party, like Simon the Zealot. The Zealot party was a group at the time that wanted the violent overthrow of Rome. They wanted Israel to have independence, and they wanted to have it, to quote a more modern day person, they wanted to get it by any means necessary. You know who said that? Malcolm X. That's a Malcolm X quote. They wanted their independence. The Zealots believed that the only way that Israel could have their independence from Rome was a violent overthrow. That Rome would never willingly allow it to happen. And there is a strong argument that Judas, while he may not specifically been a named person of the Zealot party, was very sympathetic to their point of view. And that comes a little bit into why. The question of why that we'll get to later. The question that comes up when we look at Judas is, and this is where when I have why, with this question, I wanted to ask a number of why questions. First of all, why was he called? What did Jesus see in him that caused him to be one of the 12? Jesus didn't call everybody. Jesus chose very carefully the 12 that was going to be the closest to him, his disciples. So why was Judas called? What attributes did he have that Jesus saw and wanted him to be part of that 12? Was it because he was from a different place? Was it because he was good with money, even though he might steal some? Was it because he was part of the party that Simon was a part of? Why was he called? The Bible doesn't give because it doesn't give a call story, it doesn't give a reason. It doesn't even give an implication of why he was called. So some people have come up with the theory that Jesus called him specifically to do what it was that he did. That Jesus called Judas in order to fulfill the prophecy that he would be betrayed. How do you feel about that? You grimaced. It doesn't seem right, does it? It seems like a setup, doesn't it? It seems like, why would Jesus put that onus on someone? So I struggle with that question, and that's part of the question that we have to deal with when we talk about Jesus, knowing what is going to happen to him. Does he fully know, and is everything planned out? Or it comes back to the of him being human and divine, Jesus being human and divine. Does he have the full knowledge in the sense of what's going to happen to him, so he does everything with intention in order to fulfill that prophecy? Or does it come about and he has a sense of what's going to happen, though he's maybe left in doubt of exactly how it will until it comes about? Again, we don't know. We get the sense that Jesus knows. Certainly when he turns his face to Jerusalem, he knows that he is going to his death. He knows that he will be betrayed and that he will be crucified and he will rise up 3 days. He says that to his disciples. But does he know the exact nature of who's going to betray him and who's not? That early on, when he's calling Judas, did he know that he was calling someone who was going to betray him? It's a good question to ask. And I have to tell you that I don't know exactly the answer, but I prefer to think that Jesus knows he will be betrayed, but he doesn't call Judas for that purpose. That he does see something in Judas that perhaps Judas doesn't even see. Well, as a son of God, you would believe. That's what you want to believe. That's what you want to believe. But then that raises the question of whether or not he's fully human, right? You come back to that question of fully human and fully divine. How do we balance that out? Because if you're fully divine, then you are omniscient, all-knowing, and you know everything in an exact way. But then, how can you be truly human and have fears and doubts and all those things that human beings experience? How can, when Jesus is at the tomb of Lazarus, Jesus weeps. Why does he weep? If he knew ahead of time that Lazarus was going to come out alive, why is he weeping?
I also wonder, he knew what was going to happen when he came to also feel that it could change. Otherwise, why did he pray in the garden of Gethsemane?
Right. What does he pray for? If it's possible, please take this cup from me.
So he doesn't know everything.
Right. He is, in order for us to accept or believe that he's fully human, then we have to acknowledge the fact that he might have doubts. And he might have struggles. The struggles have to be real. The temptations have to be real. All that stuff, what he's experienced has to be real human experiences, or else he's a fake. And we know Jesus isn't a fake. Yeah.
What about all those instances in the Bible that say this happened so that Scripture might be fulfilled? How does that work?
My belief is that because the scriptures were written much time after, it is an interpretation of the writers saying, oh, okay, they are making the connections. And that those connections, though Jesus did make those connections different times in his ministry, those connections weren't always made. And some of the telling of that story is saying, oh, this is what was supposed to happen, right? And that happens whenever we tell a story, isn't it? When we tell our story in the background, we make it make sense. And we make connections that we don't maybe see at the time that we're living, right? What's the saying? Hindsight is 20/20. We make connections after the fact that we're not capable of making in the moment. So it's quite possible that Jesus and the disciples are going through this experience, and in order for it to be real and authentic, there has to be a sense of that they don't know how it's going to end exactly. Jesus knows how it's going to end, and that he's going to be crucified and die, but he still has, like Dayton says, still has a hope that maybe God might change it, but at the very least, he doesn't know the details of how it will happen. When he's first entering into Jerusalem, or when he's getting close to Jerusalem, or when he's calling the disciples. So the belief that Jesus is intentionally calling Judas in order to be his betrayer seems to be, to me, a stretch. And it doesn't, like Dayton said, it doesn't seem to fit in with the way I believe Jesus was and is. What I believe is that Jesus can see in us things we are not capable of seeing, and when we make those choices, we can choose to go along with what Jesus sees, or we can choose to reject it. And what Judas did was to reject what Jesus saw in him. And as he was in the process of turning his back, to use the theme of the Bible, of turning his back or turning away from Jesus, Jesus saw the reality. And that's when he could say to Judas at the Passover meal, he could call him on it, and say, one of you is going to betray me. And Judas is saying, is it me, Lord? And Jesus says, you say so. Or in other words, you choose to. Because if Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him when he called him, and that was the reason why he betrayed him, then that takes any sort of free will out of Judas's hands. He can't do anything else, right? He has no choice in the matter. Free will's taken from him because he's already been predestined to be the one who betrays Jesus. And what do we believe as Christians? We believe in free will, that we either choose Christ, to follow Christ, or we don't. I wish I could know why Judas was called in the first place. I wish I could know more about Judas than what the Bible tells us, about what caused him to start turning away from Jesus. Now, there's a lot of theories about this. One of the most predominant theories that had a lot of, when I was going through seminary, had a lot of support behind it, but I struggled with, is that why Jesus, and this is the second why, is why did Judas betray Jesus? And one of the theories, the stronger theories, is that Judas was trying to manipulate Jesus into doing what Judas wanted Jesus to do. In other words, Judas was trying to force Jesus' hand. By betraying him, is that Judas was impatient about how Jesus was being perceived and the power and the influence that Jesus had. Fits in with the theory of him being at least sympathetic to the zealots, that the zealots might have saw Jesus as the person who was going to lead this insurrection or this revolt against Rome. And if Jesus was going to do that, Judas wanted it to happen. And Judas and Judas believed that, possibly believed that Jesus was the Son of God and had the power to do it. And so he was forcing Jesus' hands by bringing the powers of earth against Jesus. Then Jesus would overwhelm that power and claim that and free Israel. That it was a political machination. That Judas was forcing Jesus' hand to lead this revolt or to become the new kingdom, establish the new kingdom of Israel, establish the new Jerusalem. It's one theory. The other theory is that another possible reason why Judas betrayed Jesus was that he felt that he projected his own guilt on Jesus. That he was afraid of being discovered as a thief, as one who stole from the pot. And so he wanted to take out the threat of being discovered by taking away the leader by betraying the master. That he threw his hand with the religious leaders where there was more powerful and he could maybe have more influence and he could keep doing what he wanted to do. The only thing the Bible says, this is a more physical answer, is that Satan entered the heart of Judas. That he was overcome with an evil influence. Was he possessed by a demon? Was he possessed by Satan? Did he need an exorcism? I don't know, but the Bible does say that Satan entered his heart. Maybe what the Bible meant to say is that Satan entered his heart is in the form of jealousy or fear or envy or impatience or anger. But what we get a sense of is that something in Judas changed. Something changed in his heart, where he turned away from Jesus. And that's what caused him to betray. what we see is it happened shortly after Jesus confronted him about about Mary Magdalene using the nard. Is that shortly after that is when Judas went to the chief priests and said, I will give Jesus up to you. So, was it a false sense of morality where Jesus was, he thought or Satan entered his heart and told and convinced him that Jesus was selfish and not caring for the poor and the unwanted? Well, the Bible says that he didn't really care about the poor, he just wanted the money. But we have different reasons why we turn our backs. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Screw Tape Letters. You ever heard of it? It's a fictional book, obviously, because Screw Tape is an elder demon, a senior demon. And he is training Wormwood, which is a junior demon, teaching him how to steal souls. And so he writes some letters about how he can convince people to turn away from God. And what he says over and over again is he says, you can't do it directly. You have to convince them it was their idea. You take what they believe and you just twist it slightly. And then twist it again slightly. And before they know it, they're doing exactly against what they believe. And it's their idea. Could that be what the scripture's identifying that is going on with Judas? Quite possibly. All we know is that when he was called by Jesus, so we can assume that when he was called by Jesus, he was called in good faith. There was an authentic call that Jesus saw in him and wanted Judas to be close to him because he saw something in Judas. And somewhere along the line, Judas began to turn his face away from Jesus. What Jesus was offering to Judas wasn't enough. The theme of this study, and with this I'm going to close and we can continue to have the conversation. The theme of this study has been looking at the characters. And what the book tries to say is that each of these characters of the Passion have times in their life where they can make a choice. And it's not just once, but it's over and over again where they can choose to either grow closer to Jesus, draw closer, or drift away, turn away. Both Marys, time and time again, keep turning their face to Jesus. Even at the worst times, even when he is being crucified, even when he is on trial, even when it is dangerous for them to do so, they are turning their face to Jesus. Where others, like Peter, in a small sense, and like Judas, in a larger sense, at different times choose at times choose to turn away, overcome by their own sense of self, their own selfish needs. Whether it is to enrich their pocket or gain power, or just because, like in Judas's case, or like in Peter, just simply being afraid and hiding. That's what I think is valuable about the study, is it brings us contrasts in people of faith. They were all, in one way or another, people of faith. Where they placed their faith was what distinguished them. And where they turned their face in their faith, living their faith, is also what distinguished them. And with that, I'll finish this session. So, questions? Yeah. Yeah. Could be that. It could be that simple. Yeah. Serving himself. And what does Jesus say about you can't serve two masters? Yeah. You can't serve God and serve man at the same time. Not serve man, but serve manna, or the need for. But that's a balance we always have to play in our lives, right? I mean, Judas and what Jesus is speaking to isn't just reserved for Judas. I mean, he's an extreme case, but we're all tempted to put other things before God, aren't we? And just living this life. Where do we place our attention, right? When I was leading a youth group in California, and when I first got there, I went around and met all the parents and talking to the parents of all possible youth, and I go and visit with them, and I said, how important is it to you that your child, your young adult, be in youth group? Oh, it's very important. I said, how would you rank it? Oh, it's number 1 or number 2. It's that important. But then when it came to youth group meetings, soccer came first, piano lessons came first, family vacation came first. All of a sudden, when you looked at the list, where was youth group? Way down the list. And then somebody else, the standard thing is, don't tell me don't tell me your priorities. Show me your budget. I'll tell you what your priorities are. Where you spend most of your money, where you spend most of your time. Then I'll tell you what your priorities are. Don't tell me. I can determine by where your attention goes, where your money goes, where your time goes. It's the same. That's the way we're living our lives. If somebody says, "Oh, I have a strong faith," and they never do anything to live out that faith, you're going, "Really? Where? Show me where." That's the challenge we have, because it isn't easy to put our faith life first, is it? Not with bills to pay, not with children to raise, not with our health, everything else, everything, all the things, our demands. Our faith life can get pushed to the sidelines a lot. But what people of faith throughout the history of the church have taught us is that when you do make the effort to make Christ the center or Christ the main focus, then those other things find their place as well. Then you have a greater wisdom on how to deal with those other things, and they become less stressful, and they become less of a challenge, and they become less of a need to be a priority. Easier said than done. Anything else? I'm purposely not turning off my mic because I hear a lot of times, well, you have this conversation, but you got your mic off. So, leaving my mic on. It's been fun. It's been fun for me putting it together. I have to be honest, this book, I like this book, but it doesn't give a lot. I mean, what I like is the underlying theme about turning either towards God or away from God. You can find that in every chapter, so there's a consistency throughout the book of that theme.
And you're hearing more about the historical context and politics and how that wove together into the story.
There is a context to everything. And understanding the context brings us a deeper understanding of what we can learn. Nothing in life, including nothing in the lives of in the characters of the Bible, happen in a vacuum. They happen within a specific context. I had a biblical studies professor who said, when you're trying to read the scripture, you have to read what's in the text, what's behind the text, and what's in front of the text. In the text is what the text is actually saying. You know, what way it is worded and everything. What's behind the text is the context or the understanding of the culture and the times and all that, of the context in which that text is written. What's in front of the text is all the stuff, all the prejudices and all the understandings and experiences you bring when you read that text. And that if you want to understand the Bible, you have to bring all those things together. Commentaries can help you understand what's behind the text, as well as what's in the text. And good commentaries can suggest what might be in front of the text, but that's something you have to determine for yourself. So part of reading a text, part of reading the scriptures, is not just reading the scriptures, but saying, okay, what am I bringing to this text? What are the understandings or the experiences or what is the filter by which I'm reading this text? Because that filter is going to be different than the person sitting next to me in the pew. So both of us are going to read that text on the screen on a Sunday, and we're going to read it differently. And we won't know what is the true one, at least not until the minister gets intelligent. I'm kidding, of course. And that's what but that is what I try to do when I'm putting together a sermon, is I'm trying to communicate as well what I am bringing to that text. And I hope that comes out in the sermons, why I talk about my experiences, or why I raise certain questions, is I'm saying, okay, this is what I'm bringing to the text. I want to be open with that so that you don't, in order to, one of the reasons is to help try to get you to be able to do it yourself, to bring your own self to the text. Knowing full well that the experiences I bring to whatever scriptural text isn't going to be the same experiences that the people I'm talking to bring.
Knows there might be many, many more gospels and ancient writings buried somewhere like the Nile Comedy, and they will shed a lot more light to some of these questions we have.
Yeah, I reread the Gospel of Judas, and there is a very distinct reason why I didn't bring that in. It's pretty out there. And I thought that was going to bring a little bit too much controversy to it, to this particular session. I mean, it's an interesting read. I don't know if I'm buying it. Because the main purpose of the Gospel of Judas, the main protagonist is Judas. And the other 11 disciples are clueless, and Judas is the only one that understands what Jesus is really about. And so that's why he has to do what he does. What? Yeah. No. Well, I mean, that's part of it too. Is what does the word gospel mean? Good news. That's all that it means. So what the four gospels that we read in the canon, they're sharing the good news as they know it. And they don't agree specifically on exactly what that good news is. I mean, they know that the good news is Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ is risen, but how they interpret that is slightly different. Our role is to spread the good news. How we spread that is going to be up to us. So, at the risk of sounding somewhat blasphemous, we all have a gospel to share. We should be about the gospel of Annette, or the gospel of Dayton, or the gospel of Diane, or the gospel of Jesus Christ according to is probably the better way to do it. The gospel, because if you look at the way the gospels, and for the longest time, this is the way I always introduce the text. I didn't say that I would refuse for the longest time to say the gospel of Mark, or the gospel of Matthew, or the gospel of John, or the gospel of Luke. I would say the gospel according to Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Because what is the gospel? The gospel is Jesus Christ. And we all have a right, we all have the calling to spread the good news of Jesus Christ the best we are able. So in many ways, while we're never going to be in the canon of the Bible, we do have a gospel according to Dayton, Annette, Jim, Kathy, Marilyn, Esther, Diane, and Diane. That's our calling. And the more voices that speak of being touched by Jesus, the fuller picture we have of the love of God. Okay, I'm preaching way too much. Yeah. No, I'm not packed because it's just an overnight thing and I can do that in about 5 minutes.